The most common question I've been getting since the announcement, and honestly, really before the announcement, even just since already, FSR 4 was even being rumored, is can you run it on older AMD cards, or is it 9000 series exclusive? And the answer has always been it is 9000 series exclusive, but will it stay that way? AMD had always been kind of leaving the option open, but certainly has never implemented any official support for FSR 4 on older architectures, and there's been some pretty clear reasons for that. The type of compute used to compute FSR 4 just isn't supported anywhere near as well on the older architectures, so if it takes some kind of translation layer, is the performance going to be good enough to even improve, to even be worth using, right? So that I've been continuing to research whether anybody's done anything with this. Is there some kind of compatibility layer out there that actually does enable some testing of this? And I just found this, which was posted on Reddit 3 days ago by Virtual Cobbler 9930, and I will link all my sources in the video description. This is claiming to be running FSR 4 on RDNA3, and when I read into this, I'm like, okay, this actually makes sense, and there's also some performance results and some overall thoughts on this. I want to be clear, today is a news video, so I have not tried to get this up and running myself yet. This is not my own testing, but I do want to bring this to your guys' attention in the meantime, because I don't know when or if I will have a chance to do this, because it requires some Linux stuff, and I don't use Linux really other than SteamOS on my Steam Deck. But I figure some of you guys watching this may be more in the Linux world and able to do something with this. So I want to bring this to you. So the natural question, which was asked in the comments here, is, wait, how did you run FSR 4 on RDNA 3 card? So here's the answer from Virtual Cobbler here. Saying, very simple actually, new version of Mesa on Linux, you can think about it like a part of an AMD driver in that case, includes a patch for FP16 emulating via FP8 for RDNA 3. To use it, simply install Mesa 25.2 and add to game launch option in Steam. And I'm not going to bother reading this out loud, but you add this to your game launch option in Steam. So this is the first piece of the puzzle. So again, FSR 4 is being computed in a way that doesn't work well on the older generations of hardware. So what they're saying here is that the Linux driver, which is different than the driver you get from AMD on Windows. Again, I'm not really that into the Linux world, but my understanding is that the Linux drivers are more of kind of an open source project and just get built into your install of Linux in a way. Again, apologies to you Linux users who know way more about this than me. It's not my wheelhouse. But basically, the drivers on Linux are very different and more open source, and sometimes have things that the Windows drivers do not, and are not necessarily relying on AMD putting them there. So it looks like the latest version of it is allowing an emulation layer here to allow running this kind of compute through emulation on the older cards. That's what's happening. But you need another thing though, which is that honestly the way FSR 4 is normally even kicked on in games, at least the vast majority of them, even on Windows with 9000 series support, is there's a button in the AMD driver software, which isn't going to be there for the RDNA 3 cards on Linux. So you need another way to also just tell the game, hey, actually use FSR 4. So this is where Optiscaler comes in. He's saying that another thing you need is to enable FSR 4, and for that you will need either to use a DLL injection tool like Optiscaler, and then crossed out the other possibilities. So use Optiscaler. Now Optiscaler is used on Windows quite a bit as a way to inject FSR 4 into games that don't support it. But the idea here is that you're going to force the FSR 4 pathway on a GPU that would normally not even run it. Now, if you try this on Windows, it's not going to work on your RDNA 3 card, but it's looking like through Linux, because of this emulation translating between FP16 and FP8, it's allowing this to work together and actually run the code rather than just not run, okay? But then also you need an additional translation layer of Proton, the translation layer that runs Windows games on Linux, but there is one with an FSR 4 patch. You can either use Proton GE or Proton Cashios, I tried, anyway, to enable FSR 4 trick and use FSR 4 underscore upgrade equals 1. And he's saying, if he recalls correctly, new stable release of Mesa is planned for August. After that, those patches will be in any Linux distro out of the box if AMD won't play a trick on us and ask to remove the feature. Okay, so this is the implementation method. So basically, it's relying on a Proton translation layer, a version up that has an FSR 4 support kind of patched into it, as well as this FP16 and FP8 translation layer. And then again, you need a way to force the game to actually kick FSR 4 on, and that's where Optiscaler comes in. So this is certainly not just it's super easy to do kind of thing, but also doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility for somebody familiar with Linux and this type of process. Anyway, so what ends up coming out of all of this? So in the end, all of this begs the question of, with all of this various translation layer happening, does the end result actually run fast enough to be worth using? That's kind of the big question, right? Because what a lot of people don't really think about when thinking about upscalers is the way they actually work, right? So like DLSS and FSR, their main goal is to boost performance at only a minor loss to image quality. And the better quality it is, like FSR 4, it does a way better job than FSR 3 of actually reconstructing what looks like a native image, the better. So you're basically getting free performance. The difference between it being free and not free is just in image quality, right? But how is it increasing performance? Well, by rendering the game at a lower rendering resolution, it renders frames faster than at a higher resolution. That should be obvious. But if you're rendering the game at a lower rendering resolution, your upscaling algorithm, either FSR 3, FSR 4, XeSS, DLSS, whatever, takes compute time in order to take the low res image and output what's supposed to look like the higher res image. So that takes compute time. So the issue is, if all of these translation layers and this architecture not being as efficient at running FSR 4, especially through these translation layers, as the GPUs it's designed for, if that upscaling step takes too long, you won't actually get any performance benefit. So now you're just running the game at a lower rendering resolution without it actually improving performance much, right? So the question really comes in is, did it get enough of a performance boost for it to be worthwhile? So again, this is not my testing, so I need to be absolutely clear on that. But there are some claimed performance numbers here and some thoughts on image quality. They're claiming that FSR 4 versus FSR 3.1 on the quality preset in Cyberpunk with otherwise max settings at 4K output resolution. Again, using quality level upscaling would be rendering at 1440p internally and then trying to output the 4K output. We get these performance numbers. So they're saying that FSR 4 quality is producing only 56.3 FPS, whereas using FSR 3.1 quality, they're getting 85.06 frames per second. So that's a pretty distinct difference. So in other words, while it is running extremely slowly, okay? But it also varies game by game. Also, there's the question of, okay, but is it even running correctly? Is it outputting a better image? So they did also show some image quality stuff, trying to show that edges do indeed look better on FSR 4, which is this bottom image, versus FSR 3.1, which is the top image. Trying to say that, yes, it is getting better image quality than FSR 3 through this pathway. And then also talking about, okay, but at significantly worse performance. But then there is the question of, well, is it still better than running at native 4K? Okay, so there is that question. And they do say it is faster than native 4K. So there's still some performance benefit to doing this. And so that's, I guess, what these performance numbers are claiming to be. So claiming that the native 4K results are 39 FPS, whereas the FSR 4 quality mode is 54 FPS. But again, saying that the FSR 3 quality mode was 85 FPS. So it's certainly less of a performance boost, but it is apparently beating native resolution, at least in the Cyberpunk test. Now, they tested out some other stuff here as well, like Oblivion. This is again using FSR 4 versus FSR 3.1. And they're saying FSR 4 here is running at 36 FPS, whereas FSR 3.1 is running at 46 FPS. So again, FSR 3 being significantly faster. But again, if it's better than native, at least performance-wise, and the image quality is good enough, maybe it's still at least an interesting idea to play around with. They're mentioning that in this example, they particularly liked that the ghosting trails on the sword have been solved at least a lot better with FSR 4 versus FSR 3. So even though its performance isn't anywhere near as good, frame rate wise, it's at least solving a lot of the FSR 3 related image qualities. So interesting. Saying that in Marvel Rivals, the performance just isn't worth it, and that it didn't solve some of the image quality issues that they had with trailing objects and things like that. So they said that this was one where they do not think that it would be worth using in their testing. Okay? They also listed the specs of their system and all of that. So there's that. Now, I think this is very interesting. There's also a follow-up point here saying that a lot of those performance numbers were done at 4K resolution. So note that, remember, the performance you gain from the upscaling algorithm is the difference between how much quicker is it to render at the lower resolution than it was at the native resolution versus the cost of the upscaling algorithm time. So at lower resolutions, it sounds like it's not as useful. They're saying that the gain could be almost nullified at lower resolutions like 1080p, simply because it's RDNA3 can't push higher FPS with FSR 4 due to the architecture. In other words, what I would take from this, again, with it not being my own testing, but looking at what's presented here, it does seem like there's at least some case to be made for FSR 4 not being completely worthless on 7000 series cards in certain situations, but that clearly the performance isn't really there. Also keep in mind that this is running on the most powerful RDNA3 card, so I'm curious if on the anything below a 7900 XTX, like what if you're running this on like an RX 6600 or a RX 7600? Would it, through all of those translation layers, especially at the lower resolutions that those cards are actually designed to play at, would you actually be gaining enough performance for this to be worthwhile? Or would you be gaining any performance at all? But this is at least an interesting proof of concept that it's not completely out of the question for something like this to be possible. In reality, though, I think that a better option would likely be a machine learning-based upscaler like FSR 4, but designed specifically for the capabilities of the previous generation hardware. Whether AMD has the time or has already tried and just kind of failed to develop that type of thing, though, I don't know. But that's where we're at with that. All right, now let's move on to some other topics before we're done here. We're seeing, if we're staying on the AMD topic, how about Xbox announcing a multi-year deal with AMD to power their next generation devices? Again, all my sources will be linked in the video description. The direct quote here has some interesting information regarding this. They're talking about their next generation hardware lineup across console, handheld, PC, cloud, and accessories. Now, this is interesting because there's a lot of talk about, is their next generation console actually just a PC? So we'll have to see what that actually ends up looking like. But they're talking about a strategic multi-year partnership with AMD to co-engineer silicon across a portfolio of devices, including the next generation Xbox consoles, in your living room and in your hands. So they're specifically talking about that. Now, that phrasing still doesn't preclude the possibility that those consoles are actually just PCs running a console-friendly version of, more console-like version of Windows. Anyway, So they're talking about that. Doesn't feel like we get a lot of other specific information here, to be honest, although they are mentioning things like this. This is all about building you a gaming platform that's always with you, so you can play the games you want across devices, anywhere you want, delivering you an Xbox experience not locked to a single store or tied to one device. Again, hinting at that, going more in that, okay, it's really just Windows and it boots into the Xbox app, but you could also use your Steam games and whatnot. And hey, PlayStation games are coming to PC now, right? So play your PlayStation game on PC too. Anyway, so I don't know. I'm really curious where Xbox lands. Things are going pretty in all sorts of unforeseen directions with this, and I am very interested where it lands. Speaking of which, Xbox has showed off their ROG Xbox Ally, which again, is just a Windows gaming PC, albeit with the tweaked version of Windows to be more efficient and boot better into like a console-style platform, which is really, to me, the more exciting piece of all of this is those Windows tweaks rather than the device itself. But the device itself doesn't yet have a launch date. We're seeing rumors of October, and we still haven't seen a price commitment. But there's also questions on if Xbox does go to just being a Windows device, would you still have backwards compatibility with the older older Xbox console games? So could the console games run on the PC hardware? That's a big question mark, because if it was done through some sort of emulation layer, I feel like you have all sorts of licensing issues with the companies who have published those games, and I don't know, that'd be a lot to talk about. I think legally, I'm not a lawyer, but I just imagine a lot of headaches would be involved with something like that. They're saying here that we're getting some rumors that next-gen Xbox is going to support backwards compatibility at a hardware level. This is coming from Windows Central's Jez Corden, who is a pretty reliable leaker on these kinds of things, and the direct quote says, "I can pretty much confirm, I'm like maybe 2 or 3 sources off writing a report on this, but the next Xbox is 100% or 99.999% recurring running on your console, running your console games." Because I've seen that fear out there a lot at the moment, where it's like, oh my god, the next Xbox won't run console games. It's only going to be a PC. Anyway, so he's saying that he is believing like there will be hardware support for the old console games. Because some people have floated that, well, is it just going to be like you can stream your old console games, but you're not really playing them locally? Anyway, it's sounding like the current best rumors are that there will be hardware support for old console games. Whether or not that's still on a PC environment, who knows? Now, let's switch over to PlayStation, and as it relates to PC, which is one of the big issues with PlayStation games on PC has been, well, for one thing, there was the PlayStation Network requirement, which they've been seeming to walk back. But while they walked back the PlayStation Network requirement, they kept the region restrictions to not sell the games in countries that don't have PSN support. However, it's looking like that is starting to be removed. One of the games that appeared to have benefited from this most recently is Stellar Blade, which is having massive success on PC, selling over 1 million units in 3 days. Apparently, CEO is hoping for a sequel in 2027, as a bit of a side note there. But it's not the only game where that appears to be the case. So this seems to be good news. We'll have to see the developments on this. But as Stellar Blade fans may be aware of, mods are a big deal on PC. Now, Nexus Mods, though, has been sold to an undisclosed buyer. Now, I read through the statement from the Nexus Mods owner. It honestly sounds like, now what somebody says in a statement and what actually happens can sometimes be different things. It sounds like he has been very careful about who he is selling to, feeling like they understand the PC modding scene and the needs there and will be thoughtful. It doesn't sound like he was trying to just do some kind of big corporate buyout here. I'm cashing in my money here. Who cares what happens at past this point? It certainly doesn't sound like that. Sounds like he's been doing this for over 20 years and really just needs some more free time and wants to back off the being the guy absolutely everything has to be approved through. That's what it sounds like. What actually happens, we'll have to see. Now, in other PC and game-related news, Bungie has announced a marathon delay. apparently the new release date will be revealed sometime this fall. So it's not that the new release date is this fall, but that the new release date will be released sometime this fall. We'll have to see what comes of it. There was a lot of negativity around this I'd been feeling in the comment section, so hopefully this gives it a chance to find where it needs to be. I was a huge Halo fan growing up, so I'm hopeful that Bungie is able to do something good here. We'll have to see. Anyway, speaking of games and potential announcements, a Red Dead Redemption voice actor teased an announcement but could not talk about it. And then when another Red Dead Redemption voice actor was asked, do you know anything about this announcement? The response was yes. Now, these are the voice actors for, I don't want to get the names wrong, John Marston. And then he was the one initially teasing this. But then the voice actor for, I think, Arthur Morgan was asked if he knew about this. He replied with yes. So apparently there could potentially be some kind of big announcement with regarding Red Dead Redemption coming soon. But when asked about this in a follow-up, the John Marston voice actor, Rob Wythoff, I may have mispronounced that, said, "I do not make announcements for Rockstar Games. Rockstar Games makes announcements for Rockstar Games, and they don't use me to do that." So we still don't know what officially this is, but there's a lot of speculation that there's a big Red Dead Redemption related announcement coming soon. We'll have to see. In other news, The Witcher 4 has had a longer interview with Alex from Digital Foundry asking about the tech demo presentation, which, to be clear, is not Witcher 4 gameplay, but it is showing off like a target for Witcher 4 style gameplay running at 60 FPS on a base PlayStation 5. And they talked a lot about how they were able to do that, and how they were able to do that with hardware-based Lumen, not just software-based Lumen, running at 60 FPS. Now, they talked about the idea with previous Witcher games because they were also asked, okay, but what does this mean about PC? Because in the past, CD Projekt Red has been known for really pushing the boundaries of what a PC is capable of, and then scaling that back to work on consoles and lower-end PCs. And they did not achieve great success with like the PS4 version of Cyberpunk, for example. So they said that this time around, they're targeting something that can work at 60 FPS on a PS5. Again, whether the actual released product ends up living up to that goal. They're saying that this really is their design target. And they mentioned that would be extremely difficult for something like a Series S, but that it's much easier to take that as your base platform and then scale it up to reach the full potential of PC. And they also talked about how if this is designed with like hardware Lumen in mind from the ground up, then if you then brought in, even better ray tracing, things like that, it's less likely to clash with the artistic design and have the lighting not work well, that kind of thing. So anyway, this was interesting stuff to take a look at. You could follow up the sources in the video description for more information. Now, a little bit more hardware news. The AMD Radeon RX 97 GRE was a China exclusive, but is apparently expected to expand to Taiwan availability soon. Now, I'm keeping my eye on this because remember that the, spacing the name, 7900, there we go, GRE last generation was a China exclusive product for like a year, and then eventually did get a worldwide release. Now, the interesting thing about the 9070 GRE is that it's a 12 gigabyte GPU. And so if the pricing was right, it could potentially be kind of an interesting option in between like a 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, and then you've got, your 9070 XT and 9070 16 gigabyte cards. And yeah, we have the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte card, but maybe you're fine with 12 and if the price is right? So I'm interested in if this hits the worldwide market. A few other AMD hardware notes, not so much that useful for gaming, but AMD's Ryzen Threadripper 9000 series is set to launch in July and should be up to 26% faster than the TR7000 series. AMD's reportedly preparing a Ryzen 7 9700F 8-core processor. This could be more interesting in the PC gaming space if this gave you access to an 8-core 9000 series processor, but at a lower price, the F indicating it doesn't have the iGPU, the APU, or whatever you want to call it, built in. You wouldn't have the integrated graphics. Now, the RTX 5050 laptop GPU is apparently to feature 2,560 CUDA cores and 8 gigabytes of memory, making it around 19% faster than the 4050 laptop GPU. And the last thing I want to mention is, while I do a lot of PC system requirements videos, I don't think there's enough information about Borderlands 4 to do a full video on this, at least at this time. But I do want to mention here that we did at least get the old school style minimum and recommended PC system requirements. However, these old school style requirements really aren't enough to make a video about, because they don't give you any idea what resolution, graphic settings, or frame rate targets are being used here, whether upscaling's involved, any of that. But I will say the minimum is an RTX 2070 or RX 5700 XT. And they are mentioning that this requires 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So they're saying that you can't even play this game without 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I'll also mention that they're saying then that for the recommended specs, you want an RTX 3080 or 6800 XT, although note 12 plus gigabytes of VRAM. So this RTX 3080 is presumably the RTX 3080 12 gigabyte or the 3080 Ti, because the base 3080 was a 10 gigabyte card and actually would not meet this requirement. So this is another game that's really designed for 12 plus gigabytes of VRAM, and you can't even scrape by playing it with less than 8. So that's certainly interesting. But again, we have no idea what actual graphic settings that this is targeting, what frame rates, what resolutions, how much upscaling is involved, any of that. But we do know it's an Unreal Engine 5 game, so could potentially be heavy. All right, that's what I've got for you guys today. Hopefully you found the video useful and or interesting. Again, all the sources are in the video description. Huge thank you to viewers, commenters, subscribers, and channel members who click the join button to support what I do here directly financially. That is a huge help, but totally understand not everybody's in a position to do that, nor are you obligated to. Just thanks to those who did. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.